As the 49ers moved into the offseason following their loss against the Chiefs in the Super Bowl, some fans started to wonder what it was going to take in order for the Niners to get over the hump. But there was another issue that came up right after it, and it appeared that there was a divide amongst fans. But fortunately, that divide brought the real problem to the forefront. Now, I know what some of you might be thinking when I say the real problem while also naming the first episode of the new season after the name of the 49ers fan base. Don't worry, I'm not about to sit here and trash an entire fan base, especially when I consider myself to be a part of it. This season isn't meant to divide the fan base any further, just the opposite in fact. My goal of this season is to provide some much needed context and nuance to what everyone knows was an objectively bad season, and I won't sugarcoat anything. I've always maintained that I'm a Purdy fan first, but I will also be as objective as I possibly can. Will some bias slip in here and there? Maybe, but I'm going to try and keep it as minimal as possible. I am human after all. After last season's finale, you may have noticed that I mentioned other content creators. As some may have deduced, there's a specific content creator that did inspire me to make the season, but only because that specific content creator seems to like to stir the pot. There will be no personal attacks. That's not what I'm about. The opinions, though, those are fair game. But that's for a future episode. I've mentioned a few times in the past that I'm fairly new to being a football fan. To some, that would mean that I shouldn't really have an opinion on a team that I recently became a fan of, but in truth, I've been associated with the 49ers since the day I was born. You see, I was born in California, and my dad is a diehard Niner fan. I was alive when Jauan Jennings won his first Super Bowl, and I saw him win his fourth ring with the Niners in 1990 at the age of 9, although if you were to ask me anything about that game, I couldn't tell you a single thing. I don't remember the catch because I wasn't even 2 years old yet. But as I grew up, I was surrounded by Niners memorabilia because my dad never stopped being a fan, even through the dark times. The point is, I may not have been a fan of the team growing up, or football in general, but the 49ers have been a part of my whole life. So, when did I become a fan? Well, to answer that, I have to go back to 2022, when I finally attended my first live NFL game. I got to experience the game without the commercials, without the commentary, and without any of the distractions that watching the game on TV brings. I was able to live in the moment and experience it for what it was. And after that, I was hooked. If any of you have ever wondered why I enjoy going back to week 14 when Purdy made his debut, it's because of the fact that his first start was against the man who many rightfully consider the greatest of all time, Tom Brady. That's because that first game that I attended was the season opener that featured the Tampa Bay Buccaneers going against the Dallas Cowboys. You see, I was fortunate enough to see the first game of Brady's last season. And so, when I saw Purdy starting his first game in week 14, I became a fan. Not because the Niners won, but because I watched a rookie start his first game against a legend. And it didn't look like he was intimidated at all. Yes, I know it was only a regular season game, but you know what they say, you only get one chance to make a first impression. So why did I bring all of that up? Because here was a complete unknown stepping into his first game at home in Levi's against the GOAT. And the most memorable moment of that game was the faithful, knowing virtually nothing about this man, chanting his name after he connected with McCaffrey for the third touchdown of the game.
They're chanting Purdy, by the way. Brock Purdy chants in Santa Clara.
It was special because you had an entire fan base rallying behind their quarterback in such a special way. And then you fast forward 2 seasons later, and a part of that same fan base was now calling for him to be traded because they didn't think he was good enough. When I started noticing more and more comments about the noodle arm quarterback, I began to wonder if I was watching something different than all of those people. But then it hit me. The comments that they were making, the seemingly random statements that they were echoing, were originating from some of the same content that I myself had been watching, not only from the media, but from other content creators. After a win, negativity. and after a loss, even more. And toward the end of the 2024 season, it got so much worse. It seemed to me that a portion of the faithful had simply lost their faith in their team, in their coach, and especially in their quarterback. Even I began to wonder if maybe I had been seeing everything all wrong the entire time. But as I was making the first 2 seasons of the series, I began to see, in my opinion, what was really happening with certain portions of the fan base. And that, ultimately, is what season 3 is going to be about. It'll be about going through Purdy's 3rd season in the NFL, providing my own personal analysis of it, and looking at it through the eyes of the faithful. And if you're one of those people that subscribe to the opinions of some of the other content creators out there, I challenge you to view this season from my perspective, and maybe, just maybe, you'll regain some of that faith you lost along the way. In order for us to examine where things started to go wrong for the Niners in 2024, we have to go back to a moment that a lot of fans want to forget. But sometimes you have to relive a painful moment to start to heal. It was one of the most turbulent and frustrating moments of the entire season, and it hadn't even started yet. Let's take a trip all the way back to 2018, when the New York Jets used their first-round pick to draft a young quarterback by the name of Sam Darnold 3rd overall. The Jets had hopes that he would be able to help their team turn their franchise around, but as we all know, that didn't happen, and Darnold would end up moving around the league until he found himself landing in San Francisco in 2023. That was, of course, 2 years after the Niners traded 3 first-round picks to take another quarterback 3rd overall, Trey Lance, who was drafted because their starting quarterback, Jimmy Garoppolo, was no longer effective due to the many injuries he had sustained throughout his time with the team. Unfortunately, Lance suffered a season-ending injury at the beginning of 2022, leaving Garoppolo the only option to become the starter. And unfortunately for Garoppolo, he would suffer a season-ending injury late into the season, which required the Niners to rely on his backup. A backup that they happened to have drafted in the last round of that season's draft. We all know the history of what happened after that, but let's talk about a part of the season that I never really paid attention to, the offseason. Because it was during this first offseason of Purdy's first year that I believe showed the first crack in the armor of the San Francisco 49ers. During the 2022 offseason, Deebo Samuel requested a trade in order to secure an extension with the team or get his money elsewhere, and he did it publicly. When the deal was eventually signed, fans made comments on the fact that Deebo appeared to be out of shape. I have no comment on that simply because I wasn't a fan of the team at the time, and I'm not in any position to comment on the shape of a professional athlete. However, Samuel's production noticeably declined in 2022, although he did end up missing 3 games after his injury in Week 14. But just to compare, in 2021, he had a total of 15 touchdowns compared to just 6 in 2022. But there is an explanation for that. That being the fact that Christian McCaffrey was brought in Week 7 and immediately took a lot of the production off Samuel's plate, amassing a total of 14 touchdowns in 14 games, 5 receiving, 8 rushing, and 1 passing. After the season was over, Purdy would spend the offseason rehabbing his injury that he suffered in the NFC Championship against the Philadelphia Eagles. This left Trey Lance as the de facto starter once again. However, the 3rd overall pick in 2021 would have some competition from the 3rd overall pick in 2018, as Sam Darnold would be brought in to take part in a quarterback competition. When it was determined that Brock would make a full recovery, the competition would then become for the backup position. But something else was happening in the offseason that could end up potentially harming the team. That being the fact that Nick Bosa was up for his contract extension and he was holding out. Unlike Samuel though, his lasted the entire offseason, which meant he missed camp and signed the deal with only days left until the regular season began. But that wouldn't be the only thing that happened in the offseason that upset fans, as Sam Darnold won the competition and was named backup to Brock Purdy. Remember that crack I mentioned earlier? It got a little bigger after that because the Niners would eventually trade Trey Lance to the Dallas Cowboys for a 4th-round pick. Portions of the fan base, especially those that believed in Lance, were enraged. To them, Lance was truly never given the chance to show what he could do on the team. And to that I say, I don't blame them. He was never given a fair shake. However, to those people I would say this. Remember back to media week of the Super Bowl, where Kyle Shanahan, perhaps after one too many drinks, admitted to the world that during training camp of 2022, he realized that neither Jimmy Garoppolo nor Trey Lance was the best quarterback they had. It was Purdy.
Well, it's funny to hear Jed say that because it wasn't the smartest moment I've ever had. I mean, when an owner comes in after training camp practices and is like, hey, how's the quarterback? And what he means is the starter. Yeah. Or the second, and you in irritation go, I don't know, but our third guy's the best.
Trey Lance was never going to get his starting job back because the Niners had a better quarterback. But I think it was too little too late in certain fans' eyes. The Niners front office had messed up so badly. It didn't matter that the Niners struck gold when they drafted Purdy, because Purdy's arrival had basically pushed the whole Lance fiasco under the rug, at least to the media. What made it even worse, though, was that Lance was replaced by Sam Darnold. However, while getting to the Super Bowl could alleviate some of those pains, losing it brought up a whole new set of issues. Which brings us to the offseason of 2024. If a holdout in 2022 and 2023 wasn't bad enough, this offseason started with 2 holdouts, Brandon Ayuk and Trent Williams. Now, we will be diving into the ramifications of those 2 holdouts in the next few episodes, but for right now, let's just say that Purdy was not able to practice with his main target. All of that chemistry that they had been building up throughout the season was quickly dissipating, but that wasn't even the worst of it, because one of Purdy's other main weapons, the reigning Offensive Player of the Year Christian McCaffrey, was dealing with a mysterious calf injury that didn't seem to be healing. We'll go over that later. That left Purdy with 2 main weapons. Deebo Samuel, who was coming off of a weird year that had fans calling his effort into question, and George Kittle, who had to have core muscle surgery after the 2023 season. For all of the people that tried to dismiss everything that Purdy did in 2023 because of his weapons, think about this. His main weapon, holding out and not practicing. His second weapon, dealing with a calf injury that kept him from fully practicing. His third weapon, nowhere near the level he once was. And his fourth weapon, dealing with core surgery, which meant he couldn't work out during the offseason. And then we get to the 2024 draft, in which the Niners drafted a wide receiver in the first round, something that, once again, part of the fan base didn't agree with. Not only did that first round rookie deal with an injury during minicamp, which didn't allow Purdy and him to develop any chemistry whatsoever, he was also involved in an incident that could have ended in tragedy. Thankfully, there was still one other weapon that Purdy had at his disposal. The only problem? To anyone who didn't know about him, all he ever was a receiver that was mainly used for third downs. Luckily for Brock, that man proved to be one of his most reliable weapons he would have for the entire season. He just didn't know it yet. Before 2024, if you asked any non-Niner fan to name the team's third wide receiver, I'm betting most of them wouldn't be able to name him. And if you ask any non-Niner fan what the number 15 represents to them, I'm betting most of them will name a certain quarterback, even if they don't like it. But if you were to ask Niner fans those same 2 questions, I'm pretty certain they'd answer with 3 simple words. Over the course of the first 2 seasons of this series, I've talked about Purdy's main weapons: Deebo Samuel, Brandon Ayuk, Christian McCaffrey, and George Kittle. And up until 2024, there was a weapon that went completely under the radar to most non-Niner fans. But if you were to watch the Niners play, especially on third down, there was one name that was likely to be mentioned: Jauan Jennings, or as he's referred to by the faithful, Third and Jauan. If you were to go back to any Niner game over the past few seasons, the chances of a third down catch being caught by Jennings was very high, which is how the nickname came to be. If you look at his 2022 stats, they were consistent with that of a third wide receiver. And in 2023, while his production went down, which could also be attributed to CMC coming to the team, just like with Debo, where he really shined was on many of the third down conversions. The play that really opened my eyes to what Jennings could actually do was Week 12 against Seattle when he fought off multiple defenders to convert the third down. I'll be completely honest, I still don't know how he was able to get the ball across the line. Now again, to most Niner fans, they knew what Jennings was capable of, but my guess is that he really made a name for himself in the Super Bowl. He would become only the second player in Super Bowl history to have a receiving touchdown and a passing touchdown. In fact, I firmly believe that if the Niners had won that game, Jennings would likely have been named the Super Bowl MVP. I mean, I voted for him, but it's interesting when you look at JJ in relation to Purdy. Both of them were 7th round picks. Brock spent the majority of his first season as a third-string quarterback, while Jennings spent his first season on the practice squad. But once Jennings was given the opportunity, he became a major part of the 2021 season, and Brock, well, you know. Like I mentioned before, he made his impact in 2023 on crucial downs and in the Super Bowl. But in 2024, he would make his presence known in a major way, and people finally learned who Third and Jauan was in Week 3. One thing you might notice as this season progresses is that I won't be going over the games in chronological order. There's a reason for that, because this season will be about specific themes rather than specific narratives and games. And the reason why I wanted to start with the game in Week 3 rather than the Jets game in Week 1 is because this game represented a few of those themes. The first theme was Purdy's evolution as a quarterback. The fact is that Purdy, at least at the end of last season, was still being dismissed because of the team, and that he was never going to elevate players around him because he was already surrounded by so much all-star talent. Well, Ayuk still wasn't in regular season form by Week 3. Christian McCaffrey's calf injury actually turned out to be much worse than originally thought and wouldn't be healthy until Week 8. By Week 3, Deebo Samuel was out with a calf strain that he sustained the week prior, and Kittle was suffering from a hamstring injury, which also occurred during the week prior. Also keep in mind that Ricky Pearsall, at this point, was still recovering from his injury. So what did all of this mean? Well, what it meant was that Brock Purdy had the following wide receivers at his disposal: Brandon Ayuk, who was not playing up to his standards and was unreliable; Jauan Jennings, who hadn't really been the focal point of the first 2 games; Ronnie Bell, who was basically the 4th-string wide receiver; and Chris Conley, whose major contribution to the team was a great catch against the Packers and a few notable plays during the Super Bowl. And at running back, former 3rd-string running back turned starter Jordan Mason, who was covering for Christian McCaffrey, and rookie running back Isaac Guerendo, who had been drafted in that season. Purdy was starting this game with depleted weapons, but that wasn't going to stop him from playing the same way he'd been playing before. And by that, I mean once again doing his best to elevate the pieces around him. And if there's one game that I think will showcase Purdy's ability to elevate, it's this one because of one player: Jauan Jennings. You see, up until this point in his career, Jennings' best game occurred in 2021 when he caught 6 passes for 94 yards and 2 touchdowns. In this game, with Debo out and Ayuk not performing well, Jennings had a career game. In fact, since 2021, he had the second best game of any 49ers wide receivers, at least in terms of receiving yards. The only receiver to have more receiving yards was Samuel in 2021 with 189 yards. In this game, Jennings would go on to catch 11 of his 12 targets for 175 yards, and he would be the only receiver to catch a touchdown that game. In fact, he would be responsible for all 3 of Purdy's touchdowns. In Purdy, he would have one of his better games of the season, putting up 292 yards, 3 touchdowns to 0 interceptions for a final passer rating of 137.1. After that game, no one could say that Purdy and Jennings didn't have a spectacular game, except they lost that game by 3 points. And this would mark the start of the next theme of the season, the 4th quarter leads. I'll get into what I think are the causes in future episodes, but for now, let's celebrate the fact that Purdy made a connection with another wide receiver and elevated him to the point where he had the best game of any wide receiver in the NFL for week 3. In a game where Purdy solidified a new connection with 3rd and Jauan, he was still struggling to regain that connection with another one of his receivers, and fans were beginning to wonder if that connection was ever going to come back. One of the things that I've learned watching this game is that there are a few things that can derail an entire season for a team. Injuries are the major thing, and that is certainly something I'll discuss as this season progresses, but during the 2023 season, there was one thing I noticed as the season went on. With the exception of that 3-game losing streak in which Debo was missing, the team, at least in terms of offense, was a cohesive unit, and Purdy shined. But in 2024, there were a few things that hampered Brock as the season went on, but I believe there was one thing that was the worst, and I'm betting it's not what you might be thinking. One thing I've observed as my football knowledge has expanded is this: quarterbacks can't do it alone. As much as people want to praise Josh Allen for being great, and I am one of those people because after Brock, Allen is my second favorite quarterback, not even he can do it alone. He won the MVP in the 2024 season, not because of his stats, but because he did more with less. And while Josh Allen single-handedly won games off of his gameplay alone, he still had to have receivers who caught his passes, and, let's be honest, James Cook proved to be a really good running back. I should know, I had him on one of my fantasy teams. I'm also a fan of Joe Burrow. He proved in 2024 through his stats that he was one of the best quarterbacks in the league. But what did people say about him at the end of the season? Well, he's good, but he didn't even make the playoffs. No, he didn't. Now, while there were games in which Burrow didn't play up to his standards, there were games where he had to put up many points because his defense couldn't stop the other team from scoring. But what did Burrow have for all of, or most of, the entire season? Jamar Chase and T. Higgins. And at running back, Chase Brown. He had 2 dedicated wide receivers and a dedicated running back. He had consistency. Let's bring it back to Purdy. In 2023, Purdy had Deebo Samuel, Brandon Ayuk, Christian McCaffrey, and George Kittle. And with the exception of Ayuk in week 3 and Deebo in week 6 through 9, Purdy had all 4 of those players on a consistent basis. The offense, as I said before, was cohesive because all of the moving parts of the offense were there. That was not the case in 2024. His most consistent target, Brandon Ayuk, was not reliable. That was apparent from the first game against the Jets when Purdy threw a perfect pass to the end zone that, if we're being honest, 2023 Brandon Ayuk would have caught. But 2024 Ayuk, the same Brandon Ayuk that held out and missed the majority of training camp and therefore couldn't practice with Purdy, well, 2024 Ayuk dropped the ball. Ayuk did show flashes in subsequent games, but would unfortunately suffer a season-ending injury in Week 7 against the Chiefs. Suddenly, that opportunity for Ayuk and Purdy to reconnect and become one of the best wide receiver quarterback combos like they were in 2023 was gone. Purdy would now be without his main wide receiver. Deebo Samuel started the season looking good, especially in Week 2 against the Vikings, even though the team would end up losing by 6 points, and again in Week 5 against the Seahawks. But in Week 7, he would be unable to start the game against the Chiefs due to an illness. Unfortunately, he would be hospitalized with pneumonia, and when he came back, his play noticeably declined. A few other things would end up happening as the season went on, but let's be real, all of that deserves its own episode. What that ultimately meant, though, was that Purdy's next main wide receiver was nowhere near the level of player he was in 2023, and even then fans were saying that he wasn't the level of player he was in, say, 2021. But what about Purdy's next receiver? Well, obviously, if you watched last episode, you'd know that while Jauan Jennings and Purdy formed a great connection, there were still a few limitations. Listen, for as good as JJ is, and he is a beast, one of the things I noticed right away was that he simply wasn't as fast as Ayuk. Make no mistake, Purdy was still able to hit Jennings with many good deep passes, but watching Ayuk break away from defenders after he caught the ball versus JJ, it just looked like Jennings wasn't fast enough. But with the exception of 2 games, Jennings would be his most consistent wide receiver. And that's because Purdy's last main wide receiver didn't officially make his first start until week 7 due to his injury. But Pearsall had only so many games to make that connection with Purdy, and of the 11 games he was eligible to play in, he was only able to make a significant impact in 3 of them. I could be generous and say 5, but he only had over 50 receiving yards in 3 of them. Coincidentally, those 3 games were the only ones he actually scored a touchdown in. So, in terms of wide receivers, Purdy had no wide receiver 1, a wide receiver 2 who was not the player he once was, a wide receiver 3 who had to step up and basically become a wide receiver 1, and a wide receiver 4 who was coming back from a horrific injury. There was no consistency from game to game with his wide receivers. I mean, at certain points throughout the season, Purdy was throwing to his wide receiver 5 and wide receiver 6. Now, I can already hear people saying, well, a great quarterback will rise above that. And to them I say, I don't care who you put at quarterback. Anyone having to play with different receivers every single week is not going to look as good as they would if they had some semblance of consistency. But that's just the receivers. What about the running backs? Since 2020 up until 2022, Christian McCaffrey hadn't played an entire season of football. In 2022, he played 6 games with the Panthers and 11 games for San Francisco. In 2023, he played 16 games, though he did end up leaving the Browns and Commanders game early. But in 2024, after he was reported to have a calf injury, it was later diagnosed as bilateral Achilles tendonitis. He wouldn't start a game until week 10, and 3 weeks later, he would suffer an injury to his PCL, effectively ending his season. Now, the ramifications of the McCaffrey injury would affect the entire season in a lot of ways, but that will also be its own episode. For now, though, Purdy would be without his running back 1 for the entire season. Unfortunately, McCaffrey's backup, Eli Mitchell, Purdy's running back number 2, was out for the season due to injury, so Purdy didn't even have his running back 2 to play with. Who he did have, however, was Jordan Mason. Now, for those of you who've watched this entire series up until this point, you'll remember this awesome moment. Up until week 1, Mason's best game was against the Cowboys in 2023, where he was actually the team's leading rusher. He would be the starter, and while in week 1 he rushed for over 147 yards, he wasn't the running back that McCaffrey was, if only because his receiving stats were not spectacular. But Mason wasn't alone, and he didn't have to carry the running back room, especially after missing games with a shoulder injury. His backup was Isaac Guerendo, a rookie. So at running back, Purdy had an RB1 who was up until this point a running back 3, and an RB4 who had been drafted that very year. Now, don't get me wrong, Jordan Mason had a great season when he was on the field, and Guerendo showed flashes of greatness, especially near the end of the season, but McCaffrey and Purdy had built up such a great connection, especially in the receiving department, that it just never felt like the connection with Mason and Guerendo were there. What's interesting though, at least when it comes to the run game, were the rushing leaders for the entire team. Jordan Mason was number 1 with 789 yards and 3 touchdowns. Isaac Guerendo was number 2 with 420 yards and 4 touchdowns. And then you have the number 3, Brock Purdy, with 323 yards and 5 touchdowns. Just something to keep in mind for later. The very best that could be said about connections and consistency was the fact that out of all the players that were in and out throughout the entire season, the one constant that Purdy had as his main weapon was everyone's favorite player, the people's tight end, George Kittle. It's no coincidence that Kittle ended up being the 49ers' best receiver of the entire season. In fact, when you take the total number of targets, receiving yards, and touchdowns into account, George Kittle was the best tight end in the league and should have been named first team All-Pro instead of second. And I would die on that hill. I mean, that's not even counting the fact of how good of a blocker he is. Anyway, when you take into account all of the inconsistencies on the offense alone, the fact that the Niners were able to get to 6 wins should actually be a testament to their resilience. And even though people don't want to admit it, Purdy was a major factor in why they were able to even get those wins. If you want proof, just look at Week 10 against the Bucs. And we will, just not right now. And that's because this whole episode has been about the offensive struggles with consistency. And I'm going to do something that I normally wouldn't do, especially because the series deals with Purdy's journey through the NFL. But you know what they say, sometimes the best offense is a great defense. And I think it's time that we dedicate an episode to what will become the Niners' weakest link of this season. Previously on Irrelevant. And even though people don't want to admit it, Purdy was a major factor in why they were able to even get those wins. If you want proof, just look at Week 10 against the Bucs. And we will, just not right now. And that's because this whole episode has been about the offensive struggles with consistency. And I'm going to do something that I normally wouldn't do, especially because the series deals with Purdy's journey through the NFL. But you know what they say, sometimes the best offense is a great defense. And I think it's time that we dedicate an episode to what will become the Niners' weakest link of this season. When we look back on the 2024 season, it would be easy to point to the offense and say that they didn't look like the same offense as 2023, and there are reasons for that. Many reasons for that. It's also easy to point to the special teams unit and say that they didn't pull their weight, and there are a few reasons for that as well. But historically, the one unit that hadn't really faltered, at least for the past few seasons, was the defense. In 2024, however, the defense changed in ways that no one saw coming if you weren't paying attention. But for fans who were paying attention, the signs had been there since 2023. So I wanted to provide a small disclaimer before I go any further. I've always been a fan of the offense. I started my journey into this great game by participating in a fantasy league, and in this particular league, you got to choose individual players for your offense, and for defense, you picked a team instead of players. And so I've always looked at it as if the defense wasn't as important as the offense. But in late 2022, I started to notice that the defense could sometimes win you the week. In fact, during a specific week in 2022, the defense I chose was instrumental in getting me the win. The quarterback I chose also helped, but the defense I chose kept the other team to only 7 points and even got a few interceptions. And if you've been paying attention to the series, you should know what defense I chose and what week it was. It was 14. And the defense was the 49ers. In the wise words of one Kevin Wildes,
defense wins championships.
If we go back and look at the 2022 defense, they finished first in the league in total defense and defensive scoring. It's no coincidence that Nick Bosa also won Defensive Player of the Year in that season. After 2022, though, DeMeco Ryans was hired to be the new head coach for the Texans, and Steve Wilks was hired to replace him. Now, before DeMeco, Robert Saleh helped build that defense to what it would become, but more on him in a bit. Through the first 5 weeks of 2023, the defense was phenomenal, and it capped off with the blowout of the Dallas Cowboys. But it was during the 3-game losing streak that many started to notice a decline. I want to make something very clear though. By no means am I placing all the blame on the defense for those 3 losses. Should the offense have been better? Absolutely. However, let's be honest with ourselves, all of us have seen games where 17 points were enough to secure the victory. I mean, we all remember this, right? To their credit, the defense did keep that Browns game within reach, and the offense did enough to get within field goal range, and had the kick been made, we wouldn't be talking about a 3-game losing streak. And in that Vikings game, there were a few questionable calls that led the Vikings to score 22, and had things gone differently, the game could have ended 17-15. Again, the offense could have been better, but we all know how I feel about that game and what happened on that quarterback sneak. And in the Bengals game, the defense simply couldn't stop them from scoring. A lot of media attention was focused on the defensive woes that had plagued the team, and it was clear that a few changes needed to be made, and they were. Chase Young was brought in from the Commanders, and Steve Wilks was moved from the upper box down to the field. And while Shanahan didn't feel that was as important as people made it out to be, it was clear when the Niners came back from their bye that the change had made an impact. Say what you want about the Jaguars, but the defense was able to keep them to a single field goal the entire game. That was impressive. But as the season continued, there were moments where noticeable weaknesses started to emerge, specifically the run defense. In fact, it was during week 15 where this issue made itself very prominent when they allowed the Cardinals to put up 234 rushing yards. And unfortunately, it continued into the playoffs, and we really don't need to talk about the Super Bowl again. Now, it was a bit of a surprise when Wilks was fired going into the 2024 season, as some fans declared that it was the offense that was the main cause of the Super Bowl loss. But at the same time, other fans pointed out that all the defense had to do was stop the Chiefs in their final drive after Purdy left the field with the lead, and the Niners would have been the Super Bowl champions. For me personally, I believe that all three phases played a part in that loss. Regardless, the defense would in fact get a new DC going into the season. And to make a long story very short, there's a reason why Robert Saleh was brought back for this upcoming season. Now, while the defense as a whole suffered from injuries and other factors that are better left unsaid, there were a few bright spots. Let's talk about Fred Warner for a moment. There's a reason why people call him the best linebacker in the league, and not just Niner fans either. You see, in 2023, he would be selected first team All-Pro for the third time, only this time it would be unanimous, and in 2024, he would be named first team All-Pro for a fourth time. During the first 4 weeks of the season, he was also generating buzz as a potential Defensive Player of the Year. That's how good he was playing. In fact, during week 4 against the Patriots, he gave many Niner fans hope by literally snatching a pass out of the air for an interception. He fell down, he got back up, and with the help of his team making crucial blocks, would take the interception back into the end zone for the pick six. What was concerning though was that after the game, Warner seemed to slow down a bit. Many people would attribute that to the fact that the team was still missing Dre Greenlaw as he was recovering from his Achilles injury suffered in the Super Bowl. Some people, though, were actually advocating for Warner to be traded because they didn't think he was that good anymore. That was until Warner disclosed during a locker room interview later in the season that he had been dealing with a fractured ankle, an injury that he sustained in week 4 after that incredible interception. Now, I don't know about anyone else, but after I heard that he had been playing on that ankle for all of those weeks, my respect for him grew by leaps and bounds, and that's saying something since my respect for him was already so high. But he wasn't the only defensive player that impressed me, because behind Warner in the secondary was Deommodore Lenoir. Now, for most, he was in the shadow of Charvarius Ward, especially in 2023, but in 2024, he established himself as the clear number one, and I think that really presented itself in their first game against the Cardinals when, after a field goal was blocked, he ran the ball in for the touchdown, which helped extend the score. Now, the team would go on to lose that game, but the main reason for that, I believe, was the fact that during a kick return, Jake Moody injured his leg after he attempted to stop the returner, but that's another story for another time. You see, without a kicker, the team couldn't kick a legitimate field goal. Now, there were other players that established themselves as potential future stars, two of them being rookies Malik Mustafa and Ronaldo Green. But that still wasn't enough to keep the defense from completely collapsing. A defense that was ranked in the top 5 in 2023 had fallen, and fallen hard, being ranked as low as 29th by Pro Football Reference. And a major area where the defense struggled was making stops in the fourth quarter, making it harder for the offense to maintain those leads. But, as I said before, it wasn't just the defense that struggled in the fourth quarter. In fact, it became more apparent as the season went on that the offense was struggling in more than just that. You see, in 2023, the offense did a great job of making sure that losing fourth quarter leads were almost impossible because they were regularly scoring 30 or more points each game. And they did that because as efficient as they were outside of the red zone, inside the red zone, they were even better, as in 2023, they would lead the league with a 68% success rate. In 2024, however, they would find themselves near the bottom. And for many fans, there was a clear reason why. It's almost weird to think about the fact that despite the Niners ending the season 6-11, they still managed to have the fourth best total offense in the NFL. They managed to average 376 yards per game with over 40 total touchdowns. And while their rushing offense ranked 12th, it was their passing offense ranking 4th that helped them achieve that 4th overall rank. But if you were to listen to certain people, you would have thought the offense was dead last. And it's easy to think that because despite how efficient they were, there was still one area of the field that the offense struggled in the most, and it was easy to see where that was. If you rewind time back to the start of 2023, no one knew just how good Purdy was going to look coming back from his elbow surgery. Many people didn't think he'd be the same, and for some, they really hadn't bought into the hype that Purdy generated from the limited sample size he had in 2022. But as the season went on, people started to believe that the Niners looked unbeatable. Except it wasn't because of Purdy. Or at least some people didn't think it was because of Purdy. Because standing behind him, or sometimes beside him, happened to be one of the most versatile players in the entire NFL and arguably Purdy's most potent offensive weapon, Christian McCaffrey. You see, the reason why, at least in my opinion, McCaffrey was so potent in 2023, and you could even go back to 2022, is because of his versatility. He's a threat in the backfield because of how he runs the ball, but he can be even more of a threat when he lines up as a receiver. And that, more than anything, was a major factor in one particular part of the field. I can't speak for all fans, but as soon as the offense got into that part of the field, people were most likely already groaning, knowing that the field goal unit would soon hit the field. And trust me, we'll get to that soon. In 2023, when the Niners would hit the red zone, the only question people were asking was, is this going to be a rushing touchdown for CMC, or was it going to be a passing touchdown to one of the players that weren't being covered because of CMC? But let's pause on that for a second, because the answer to that second question could have been CMC. Because as good of a running back as Jordan Mason was in 2024, I said it in episode 4 that what separates McCaffrey from most running backs in the league, even a running back like Saquon Barkley, is the fact that CMC is an excellent receiver. Now don't get me wrong, he's never going to be an elite receiver like Justin Jefferson or Jamar Chase, but as a running back, he ranks amongst the best, if not the best in the current era of the NFL. But it was clear from week 1 that him not being on the field affected the offense more than what people originally thought. See, the final score of that week 1 game was 19-32, but Purdy didn't throw a single touchdown the entire game, and the offense was only able to score 2 on the ground. For those good at math, that leaves 18 points. That's 6 field goals. Now, let me remind everyone that Purdy did have that amazing throw to Ayuk that he could not hold on to, but still, that would have only been an extra 7 points, which would have made the score 19-36, assuming that the field goal count would have gone down by 1. That's still 5 field goals. Let's be real, the 2023 Niners could have possibly turned 3 of those into touchdowns. Already, people were wondering what was going on, but because they still won the game, many people weren't too worried. Fast forward to week 3, and Purdy and Jennings were left to drag the offense to an early lead, and Purdy's connections to Jennings in 2 of those 3 touchdowns occurred in the red zone. Once again, people didn't worry because that connection was going strong, and then they lost that game because the Niners simply couldn't score more points. Then, in week 5 against the Cardinals, the Niners lost the ability to kick field goals due to Jake Moody getting injured, and suddenly the red zone success became an issue. When you rewind back to 2023, there was one player that gave the Cardinals a lot of trouble, Christian McCaffrey. He scored 7 touchdowns against them, including a touchdown in which he was so open that he was able to fall down, get back up, and get into the end zone without being touched. And in this game, the offense simply couldn't score. Purdy was able to put up 1 touchdown, with the other coming off of a blocked field goal that Lenore grabbed and took into the end zone. That's 2 touchdowns, but 23 points, meaning 3 field goals. Now, I'm not going to pile on Jordan Mason here because he was trying his best to hold down the running back position as best he could, but it should be noted that there was a very costly fumble late in the game that could have possibly been another touchdown on the board. And it didn't get any better from there, even when McCaffrey finally returned. For those that have watched the whole series, I alluded to the fact that Purdy and the Buccaneers have been intertwined throughout his whole career. His first start in 2022, and consequently his first victory as an NFL starter, his first perfect passer rating, and consequently a record-setting passer rating, and in 2024, he would accomplish something that people were still asking him to do. He would lead a genuine game-winning drive. Now, before you point out the obvious, what I mean by that is this. In that first Raiders game, he drove the team down the field and the game would have been won if the kicker had made the initial kick, but he didn't and the game would go in overtime, which they would then win. In the Browns game, he did the same thing, but Jake Moody missed and the Niners lost the game. In the divisional round against the Packers, he did execute the game-winning drive, but there was enough time on the clock for the Packers to get the ball back and attempt their own. That, of course, ended in that interception. So when we look at this game, the game was tied, and Purdy led a true 2-minute drive, which left Jake Moody just enough time on the clock to make the kick and win the game, which he did. Now, I know what people might be expecting at this point, and trust me, that will be discussed, but not right now in this episode. And so, with that kick, Brock proved without a shadow of a doubt that he could lead the team down the field and win the game when needed, except the game ended with a field goal. Many people still weren't happy because, even with McCaffrey back on the field for the first time all season, the red zone efficiency was still an issue. And that's because McCaffrey, to many, didn't look like McCaffrey. He looked slow. He didn't look as explosive. To make no mistake, the connection that he and Purdy had was still there, and many people pointed out that as soon as CMC was back on the field, Purdy started checking it down a little bit more than he had been all season. And see, my personal theory, and one that many also believe, is that Purdy didn't trust his other checkdown options. It was clear that none of the running backs could truly replace McCaffrey in the red zone, and it really showed when the red zone efficiency stats were released for the year. You see, in 2023, the Niners led the league with a 68% success rate, and at the end of 2024, they fell to 14th with 57%. An 11% drop. Unfortunately, after McCaffrey's injury against the Bills, it was clear that the Niners really needed him because field goals simply weren't cutting it anymore, especially since fans were once again calling for a certain player to be removed from the team. Remember that Bucs game? I did say we'd be going back to it soon, and I think it's time to rip the band-aid off completely because this time we address the elephant in the room. Because that game, I believe, signaled the beginning of the end for the 49ers as we knew them. It really did feel like this season was full of issues, and it felt like all season tensions were building because of the collective performance of the entire team. And it would be in week 10 when these tensions would come to a head. And unfortunately, it came at the expense of a player that was already being maligned by the fan base because of a few reasons. But week 10 would also expose a much bigger problem, and one that, in my opinion, dictated the rest of the season for the worst. Because in one singular moment of frustration, to the fan base at least, the team didn't look like it was ever going to recover from it. I realize the timing of this episode is kind of funny, given that a certain kicker just won the game for the team after kicking a career-high 59-yard field goal, but at the same time, this episode really isn't about Jake Moody or even the special team unit as a whole. But since I will be talking about the incident that happened during the Bucs game, and that directly involved Moody, I can't not talk about him. Now, I posted episode 1 of this series all the way back in January, and while most of these episodes could be considered standalone, there was one moment in the first episode that I intentionally put in there because I knew eventually I'd come back to it. This would make Suckup the first Mr. Irrelevant to play in and win a Super Bowl as an NFL starter. With all due respect though, he was a kicker. Now, don't get me wrong, kickers are very important to a football team. Now again, I'm not going to sit here and trash Jake Moody. We all know the things that occurred in 2023 in various games, and we all know what happened in 2024. But I do want to put some context on what we're going to discuss. So let's talk about Moody's injury first. Last episode, I mentioned that in week 5, Moody was injured when the special teams unit couldn't stop a kick return, and Moody ended up trying to make the stop, which, to his credit, he was successful in doing, but he ended up suffering a high ankle sprain as a result. Now, up until that point, Moody had been relatively solid for each of those games, and if you go back to week 1, he put up more points than the entire offense when he went 6 for 6 for 18 points. He would be out until week 10, where he would return from the game against who else but the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Now, we all know how I feel about the team in relation to Brock, so we don't need to rehash that here. The trouble started at the end of the first half when Moody missed a 49-yard field goal attempt. Now, during the fourth quarter, he would miss 2 more, and it was after the third miss when the camera caught something that occurred on the Niners sideline that we hadn't seen before, or at least I had never seen before.
Deebo Samuel. Oh.
Deebo, he doesn't want to hear that.
Understandably, the fans were very much divided. Some would side with Deebo because they were just as frustrated with Moody because had he made that kick, the Niners would have taken a much bigger lead. Others would call for Deebo to be reprimanded because he put his hands on another player during a game. It was made worse by the fact that Deebo was a captain. Also, the fact that for many fans, Deebo really had no right to complain about another player's performance, given the fact that up until that point, Deebo hadn't made a significant impact on the team as a whole. Now, I will point out that all of this did occur after Deebo was hospitalized with pneumonia, but what occurred on the sideline was, for lack of a better term, the straw that broke the camel's back. The spotlight was centered directly on Samuel. Every catch, every drop, every mistake was being called out. But more than that, it felt like the entire mood of the team had changed, at least in my opinion. So let's bring it back to Brock for a bit. If you remember, episode 4 was called Connections, and in that episode, I mentioned Purdy's connections with his receivers. In 2022 and 2023, Purdy had developed a great chemistry with Deebo. In fact, some of Purdy's most outstanding plays were made to Deebo. In 2024, however, that connection just didn't seem to be there, or at least it wasn't as prevalent as it was in 23, and it didn't improve after week 10. In fact, back in December, Deebo would put out his tweet claiming that he wasn't struggling, he just wasn't getting the ball. Now, given everything that I've talked about in this series and how Brock likes to spread the ball around, some took that as a direct shot at both Brock and Kyle Shanahan. What made it worse was that this was done after the Niners had won in convincing fashion against the Bears. And then the second Rams game happened. To say that was an ugly game would be a major understatement. Neither quarterback did well, and yes, I'm not going to sit here and say Brock was good because he wasn't. Neither him nor Stafford had a touchdown, and unfortunately, Purdy did have that interception late in the fourth. But that's not what people were really talking about. It was Deebo. A week after he sent out that message about not getting the ball, he was targeted 7 times throughout the game and only caught 3 passes. Honestly though, out of the 4 passes that were incomplete, there's only one that fans remember, and that's the pass that he dropped that most likely would have resulted in the only touchdown in the game. And while some of the other drops that have occurred since Brock was drafted could be attributed to a less than ideal pass, there's no way that anyone could have criticized this one. It was perfect, and it was dropped. Whether or not that potential win could have saved the team's season or not, one thing was very clear. It really did appear that Deebo's days with the team were over. Many fans were upset at the fact that he wanted to be targeted more, and then when it felt like the team was forcing the ball to him, he couldn't hold on to it. Fans were calling for him to be traded, and after the season was finally over, he was. This iteration of the team was done. It was over. 6-11. The team was finished. Many players would end up leaving for various reasons. Deebo would be traded. And that was that. Now, we look to the future. New rookies, new players, new coaches, new expectations. Some players got paid while others began the grueling process of healing their injuries. The next time we see this team in the regular season, things are going to be different. Some familiar faces do remain: Fred Warner, George Kittle, Nick Bosa, CMC, and a few others. And right smack in the middle is the reason why you're here watching this video. QB1, the starting quarterback of the San Francisco 49ers, Brock Purdy. We've got one more episode to go. The season 3 finale of irrelevant. And I couldn't think of a better way to celebrate this team and this quarterback than by giving you my personal top 15 plays of the past 3 seasons. So stay tuned. With the NFL season just around the corner, I figured it would be good to end the season of Irrelevant on a high note, especially after the less than ideal 2024 season. So what better way to end on that high note than by celebrating the reason why this series exists in the first place, quarterback 1, Brock Purdy. And what better way to do that than by going over my own personal list of his 15 best plays over the past 3 seasons. So sit back as we relive some of the best moments of Brock Purdy's career. It's crazy to think that 3 years ago, the 49ers would use a throwaway draft pick on a franchise-changing player, but as we all know, that's exactly what happened. Brock's career has already been filled with many highs and quite a few lows. Actually, what's really crazy to me is that as I was going over plays in 2023 that I really liked, I realized that I could make an entire list based on nothing but that one season. What's more is that I could also make a respectable list based on the 2024 season, even though it wasn't the season that people thought it was going to be. I've seen lists where a person will give their honorable mentions first, but I wanted to be different simply because there are so many plays to choose from. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you 5 plays from each season, which would equal 15. Now, these plays aren't going to be in chronological order because I think some plays are better than others. But I also wanted to give the honorable mentions their due, so I thought it would be cool to give an honorable mention to another play that's similar to the play that I chose. For example, if I were to choose Brock's deep touchdown pass to CMC in his first start, I could choose to make his touchdown pass to Ayuk in that same game as an honorable mention simply because those 2 passes were so similar. But I might like one over the other for a specific reason, which I would then go over. Something I want you to keep in mind though is that the honorable mention might not be a play from the same season, as you will soon see. So without further ado, here's my list of the top 15 plays of Brock Purdy's career with some honorable mentions. One of the things that I've seen people give Purdy a lot of credit for is his willingness to take a hit if it means getting the ball downfield, and that usually means that he's getting blitzed. And no 2 plays really show that off better than these 2. First, as our honorable mention, is the absolute dart that Purdy threw to one of his favorite targets, George Kittle, in the 2023 Week 15 game against the Cardinals when he connected with Kittle for the first down. One thing to remember about this play was this was after Purdy had been evaluated for a stinger that he had sustained earlier in the game. And while that was an amazing throw, it doesn't quite live up to the play where we all said to ourselves, is this guy legit? Of course, I'm talking about my number 15 play, the throw he made to Kittle as he was getting hit to convert to first down in Week 13 of 2022 against the Dolphins after he took over for Jimmy G. We didn't know what Purdy was at the time, so all we were seeing was a third-string quarterback get blasted by the defender as he let the ball go. And when Kittle made that catch, I think we all knew that the Niners possibly had something special. After the 2023 season, one of the many things we discovered about Purdy was that he was actually more mobile than we gave him credit for. For this entry, I wanted to give the honorable mention to Purdy's rushing touchdown from the Week 11 loss against the Seahawks. I think that run really solidified his scramble ability, and quite honestly, his tenacity to get points for the team, even if that meant putting his own body in danger. But should we really have been that surprised to find out that when a play breaks down, Purdy will find a way to get points? I don't think so, because at number 14, I actually have his first rushing touchdown against the Bucs in Week 14. The reason I find this one so special is because this was Purdy's first official start, so again, no one really knew what he was going to be. Now, Purdy has had many other rushing touchdowns since that moment, but once again, I think this play showed that Purdy was a dog and that people were going to be shocked by what he could really do. Now, I think this one is going to be weird for some people, mostly because it wasn't a really flashy play, but I wanted to highlight this one because one of Purdy's strengths is his ability to process very quickly, and that was on full display in our next entry. To demonstrate this, I wanted to give the honorable mention to his third run against the Lions in the NFC Championship game. The drive came down to 3rd and 4, and right away, Purdy could tell that the play was going to break down, and he ran for 21 yards, saving the drive and setting up McCaffrey to have an amazing run, which eventually led to the touchdown. So now you might be saying, well, why is that only an honorable mention? And it's because of the number 13 play that occurred in Week 8 of 2024 against the Cowboys. I wanted to highlight this play because when I saw it for the first time, I couldn't believe that it actually happened, and that was Purdy's split-second decision to not throw the ball to Debo and instead take off running to get the first down. From the way it looked, the play called for Purdy to receive the snap and immediately swing it out to Debo. But as soon as Purdy turns to throw the ball, he sees that the defender would almost assuredly knock the pass down or intercept it, so he took off. Now, it could just be me, but when I saw this play for the first time, I honestly thought that it was a designed run because of how smooth it looked. And the best part was that it confused the defense because Purdy had nothing but open field to run. So while it may not have been a flashy play on everyone's radar, for me, that decision making was second to none. So I've already given this one away, but since the honorable mention and the actual entry took place in the same game, I figured I would use it as an example. In my mind, the honorable mention and the actual entry could be interchangeable, but one just inches out the other. For the honorable mention, I went with Purdy's deep touchdown pass to Brandon Ayuk in his first NFL start against the Buccaneers. The reason I went with this is because it showed off that Purdy wasn't afraid to take the chance to throw deep to his receiver with multiple defenders around. When you see where Ayuk caught the ball, you immediately notice how close the other defenders actually were. But of course, number 12 has to be the touchdown pass before this one, the deep shot to McCaffrey. And the reason this one gets the nod over the pass to Ayuk is because Purdy stayed in the pocket and took a wicked shot by the defense. Once again, it was Purdy's toughness that really showed what kind of quarterback he would end up being. In fact, it was on this play that Purdy actually suffered an injury to his oblique that could have kept him out the following week. After that touchdown, he still played for most of the game until he was taken out when the game was well in hand. He had, in my opinion, one of the best starts to any rookie career, and he showed with these two passes that he wasn't going to play it safe. For this entry, I looked over the plays, and while there are different throws that led to touchdowns, for me, it's all about the accuracy that Brock has, and these two plays show that off nicely. One thing I want to point out is that the honorable mention that I had for this entry could actually be on someone's list, and no one would disagree. But Purdy's back shoulder touchdown pass to Deebo Samuel in Week 15 of the 2023 Cardinals game was simply perfect. When someone says that Purdy put the ball in the only place the receiver could catch it, this throw is a perfect example. Because not only was it pinpoint accurate, there was nothing the defender could do to break up the play, and it was so close to the end zone that the only way the play could have failed was if Deebo had dropped it. Thankfully, he didn't, and quite honestly, it's the play that I go back to from time to time just to marvel at how good of a pass it actually was. So, if that was just an honorable mention, what could possibly be the actual entry? Well, coming in at number 11 is Brock's deep pass to Kittle for the touchdown in Week 4 against the Patriots in 2024. Now, what truly makes this play is Kittle's amazing catch, which is why I don't have it higher, even though I'm sure a lot of people would have this in their top 10. But the reason it's still on the list is because, once again, Brock put this ball in the only place that Kittle was going to be. Now, what makes this even more impressive is that Kittle said after the game that he couldn't believe they were even going with this actual play because the play wasn't meant to be done in the red zone. To me, that makes the throw that much more impressive. Oh, and there is one other thing that makes this play even more special. You see, for those that don't know, this was the third passing touchdown that Purdy had thrown in the same drive. The other two were taken away because of penalties. If that doesn't scream amazing, I don't know what does. As we head into the top 10, people have to be wondering what the plays coming are because any of the plays before could have easily been a top 10 play to some people, and that includes the honorable mentions. That's how good the plays have been, despite what others might think. So with that, the honorable mention comes courtesy of the Week 14 game against the Chicago Bears in 2024. And like number 13, this play probably didn't seem that important, but it was the deep pass to Isaac Guerendo that really impressed me. Not because it was a throw that we hadn't already seen Purdy make, but because it was to the rookie running back. This play represented to me Purdy's ability to connect with other members of the team, not just the star players. But if that pass looks familiar, it's because we had seen Purdy make that same throw to another running back, which of course leads to our number 10 pick, that beautiful floating pass that Purdy made on his back foot to Christian McCaffrey in Week 10 against the Bucs in 2024. This was McCaffrey's first game of the season after he was cleared to play following his Achilles injury. People weren't sure what CMC was going to look like after missing so much time, and while he didn't score any touchdowns, this throw and catch proved that the connection that Purdy and McCaffrey had since McCaffrey joined the team was still there. While many people thought Purdy was throwing the ball away, what he was actually doing was executing a play that he said him and McCaffrey had done in practice many times, and that Purdy knew exactly where McCaffrey was going to be, showing that a connection between a quarterback and a receiver is still one of the most important connections there are in football. This one was tough to put here because it's such a great play and a good example of a quarterback trusting a receiver. What's more is that from an honorable mention to the actual entry, it also showed off the evolution and connection of Brock Purdy and George Kittle, because the honorable mention is Brock Purdy's touchdown pass to Kittle at the back pylon versus the Raiders in 2022. The throw was on target and the catch was incredible. What impressed me with the play as a whole was that Purdy rolls out of the pocket and finds Kittle easily. It honestly looked like they had been playing for years together already, but it was only Purdy's fourth game as a starter, which brings me to number 9. The front pylon throw to Kittle in Week 5 against the Seahawks in 2024. Again, the catch was unbelievable and it showed how good Kittle really was at his toe taps, which he prides himself on. But that throw, if that throw is even a tick late, it's batted down. If it's a tick early, it's a possible pick. If people want to continue to downplay Purdy's timing and accuracy, there's nothing more that can be said. But if you come away from this play and you continue to say that he's not a good quarterback, I simply don't know what to tell you. And just think, this is number 9. This could have easily been number 1 on someone's list. And what's more, this is the 4th play from the 3rd season. You know, the bad season that no one wants to talk about. But we move on to the next entry. Now, the reason why these are here is because throughout Purdy's career, for some reason, he's been saddled with the check down merchant title. It's honestly the easiest way to tell if someone actually watches Purdy play or whether they just watch specific highlights. But the plays for this entry should really put that narrative to rest. And the honorable mention that I picked out might be strange to some people because it happened after Purdy's first start. So we had already seen him throw deep, but this was the first time I had really seen him throw a deep ball to a receiver in stride, and that was Purdy's deep touchdown pass to Kittle in Week 16 of 2022 against the Commanders. By this time, the Niners had basically already won the West and they were already in the playoffs, but when Purdy let go of this ball, I didn't know who he was even throwing the ball to, and then the camera pans to the right and the ball is landing in Kittle's hands as he's entering the end zone. It was an impressive throw and one that I still remember to this day. But there is another pass that beats this one out, and it's the number 8 entry. During the press conference after the Week 14 game against the Seahawks in 2023, Brock was asked about his touchdown pass to Debo. It was then that he mentioned that Debo was the last read in the progression, but he saw that the defender was flat-footed, and he knew that Debo could beat him, so he launched the ball and hit Debo in stride for the touchdown. This is a play that I love to watch because the arc of the ball is beautiful, and the fact that Debo never slows down as the ball hits him is amazing. In fact, Debo had to speed up just to be in position to catch the ball because he didn't think that he was going to get it because he was the 4th read. It's crazy, but if you look at the ball, it really does appear to land perfectly in Debo's arms. To me, that throw solidified Purdy as a top quarterback in the league. At this point, you might be asking yourself, why haven't I seen any plays involving Brandon Ayuk? Well, it just so happens that this next entry involves 2 of them. Now, I went back and forth on which play to make the honorable mention and which play to make the actual entry, and to be honest, either one is the correct choice, but I chose to make the touchdown pass to Ayuk in the Week 11 game against the Bucs in 2023 the honorable mention here. This was a tough one because this was the game where Purdy achieved his perfect passer rating, but I made this an honorable mention because it's very similar to number 8. Purdy hits Ayuk perfectly in stride. Now, while this was the longer of the 2 touchdowns yardage-wise, this touchdown was split more evenly between the pass by Purdy and the yards after catch by Ayuk. The last entry had very few yak yards, so the touchdown was more reliant on that throw. Now, the play that I chose for the number 7 entry, I don't think anyone is going to have an actual issue with because the pass I'm talking about actually came a week later when the Niners traveled to Seattle to avenge their Thanksgiving loss years before this, and I'm betting you already know what play I'm going to highlight. You see, up until that point, Ayuk hadn't had many targets that game, and the commentators actually mentioned that as we neared the end of the game. And of course, right after that, Purdy delivered a dagger to Ayuk for the final touchdown of the game. What made this throw special was the fact that he not only threw it in between 4 defenders, but when you listened to Shanahan after the game, no one could believe that he was even throwing the ball since there was a check down available to get the yardage for the first down. It proved, once again, that if Purdy saw a big play, he was going to take the risk and give his guy a chance to make it. It's still one of those plays that you can go back to every now and then and still be impressed with it. When I was putting this entire list together, I started to notice that a lot of amazing plays that Purdy's made throughout his career have involved George Kittle, and this entry is no different. In fact, this entry actually included 2 plays made against the same team with the same result, but with different paths to get there. In the honorable mention slot, we have the touchdown pass to George Kittle in Week 14 against the Seahawks in 2023. Now, there really isn't anything too fancy about this throw and catch, but I still think it was a fantastic pass because if you're not paying close attention to Kittle, you might think he appears out of nowhere to make that catch. But there was an even better play that occurred in Purdy's first season in Week 15 against the Seahawks, and everyone who saw that game knows exactly which play it is. At number 6, we had Purdy's amazing double pump fake pass to Kittle down the middle for one of the easiest touchdowns I've ever seen. In fact, that play was so good that in 2023, in that Week 14 game, the Seahawks used that exact same play against the 49ers with the same result. Although, if you look at that play side by side, you will notice a distinct difference in the 2 quarterbacks and the way they executed that play. It's still one of the most memorable plays that I've ever seen and one that I see mentioned all the time. This next entry is one that I can see being controversial because it's not a play that people will talk about without being prompted, at least from what I've seen, but it's a play that I think about often and what it actually meant for the game as a whole. But first, the honorable mention. Now, I'll be honest and say that this is only an honorable mention because of the play that I actually chose, and this is a play that Purdy made that's semi-comparable, but it occurred in Week 14 against the Bucs in 2022. And for some, this is when they knew Purdy was more than just a third-string backup when he rolled out of the pocket to his right and right into the path of an oncoming defender, except the defender never had a chance to make the tackle as Purdy breaks mid-run, avoids being touched, and makes the jump pass to Debo for the first down. Honestly, it's a thing of beauty, especially if you watch it in slow motion. I don't care what anyone says, most third-string quarterbacks don't do things like this. This is when we knew that Purdy could be special. So what could possibly be number 5 then? Well, I'm sure if I said the words Purdy, Juice, and Lions, you'd know the exact play. Honestly, I've watched this play over 3 times and I still don't know how Purdy managed to do it. It is, of course, Purdy avoiding the sack, scrambling out of the pocket, and connecting with Kyle Juszczyk, who made one of the craziest tiptoe catches that I've ever seen, and got the first down to keep the drive alive. See, while most people would call Purdy's height a disadvantage, it was this play that made me realize that if Purdy was any taller, I don't think he could have avoided the sack. When you watch that play from different angles, you notice that Purdy's knees could have easily hit the turf, but they didn't. For anyone who tries to make a claim that Purdy doesn't have pocket awareness, they need to see this play. Also, shout out to Juice for being one heck of a receiver. I don't think he gets enough credit for what he brings to this team, but this play should prove otherwise. Well, we're getting down to the cream of the crop, and I know that there are some of you who are still waiting to hear certain plays. This is where things got really tricky, simply because there are so many great plays that have happened over the past 3 seasons. Now, both entries for number 4 do involve the same type of play, and once again, for me, they could be interchangeable, but I chose what I chose for very specific reasons. And so, as an honorable mention, we have the broken play in the Week 15 game against the Cardinals in 2023, where Brock is forced to roll out of the pocket due to a breakdown in protection, and when it looks like he could take off on a run, he instead sees a very open Christian McCaffrey and lobs the ball while moving in his direction, which CMC is then able to catch, fall down, get back up, and still make it into the end zone. It's one of my favorite plays to rewatch because that play only works because of Purdy's rollout. Why? Because when he rolls out, the defender who was on McCaffrey has to stay back to prevent Purdy from running, allowing CMC to get down the field unprotected. Which brings us to the number 4 entry, that being the scramble drill touchdown to Brandon Ayuk just 2 weeks later against the Commanders. Not only was Purdy coming back after a brutal game against the Ravens, but it was this game and that touchdown pass that helped him break the all-time passing record for the franchise. But more than that, it really showed how in sync Purdy and Ayuk really were, because as Purdy is scrambling to the right, you see him point to the end zone, allowing Ayuk to get into position for the pass that Purdy threw. There is a reason I use this play as part of the intro for season 2 of the series. It's an amazing play from start to finish because in my opinion, it showed off why Brock Purdy's pocket awareness is elite. And here we are at the top 3. Like an earlier entry, both the honorable mention and the actual play were both in the same game. If I were to mention the Week 10 game against the Jaguars in 2023, I'm betting you all already know at least one of the plays, and you'd be right. But let's talk about the honorable mention first, and that would be, in my opinion, the first touchdown pass to Brandon Ayuk. Yes, we all know it was the bad decision, and that play could have been a disaster. But at the same time, to me, what I took away from that pass, catch, and touchdown was how accurate Purdy actually had to be in order to get that ball in the exact place that it needed to be. Any lower, that ball is intercepted. Any higher, and Ayuk doesn't come down with the catch. At the same time, Purdy also had to deal with the fact that Kittle was not where he was supposed to be, and he could have easily batted that ball down as a safety measure. But the pass was perfect. Like I said in the episode that featured this play, the decision was bad, but that pass was anything but. Which of course brings us to number 3, and we all know what play it is. Some of you probably believe this should have been the number 1 play. It's that good. The thing is, I don't even need to explain what happened. It will go down as the most unexpected touchdown that I've ever seen. I could watch that play over and over again and still not know how he got that ball to Kittle. When people talk about the trust a quarterback has to have with his receivers, this play will always be the one that I think of. It's that good. But it's not in the top 2 plays, at least in my opinion. In fact, for the top 2 plays, I don't even have an honorable mention because when you look at these plays on their own, in my opinion, they show why Purdy is the franchise quarterback for this team. I know there are fans out there that would disagree with that, and that's their right. But to me, these 2 plays should be all that's needed to explain why. At number 2, we have the touchdown pass to George Kittle against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers in Week 10 of 2024. One of the criticisms that Purdy faced this past season was that he was holding the ball for too long, but at the same time, there were times when the receivers weren't getting the necessary separation, so Purdy would have to scramble to keep the play alive, and in this instance, that's exactly what he did. He kept the play alive long enough for Kittle to get open in the end zone. He was able to scramble to his left, find Kittle, and launch the ball to the only spot that gave Kittle a chance to come down with the ball, in the back of the end zone, over the shoulder, and once again, Kittle got to show off his toe tap skills. He came down with the ball for the touchdown, and in my mind, it cemented the fact that Kittle had surpassed everyone else as Purdy's most reliable weapon on the football field. For some, he already was, but this game cemented it for me. In all honesty, this was a play that, at least for me, made me realize that it didn't matter what anyone else had to say about Purdy. It didn't matter if they thought he was a below average quarterback. It didn't matter that people said he was only good because of his team. It didn't matter that people didn't call him elite. None of it mattered because this play showed me otherwise. Slap a number 15 on the back of his jersey and change his last name to Mahomes, and that play is being showed 3 times an hour on ESPN for months. But it's still not enough to make the number 1 entry, and by now, you probably have already figured it out. Honestly, the strangest thing about putting this play at number 1 is the fact that the result of the play was an incompletion, but it's one of the craziest incompletions I've ever seen. I'm confident that if Brandon Ayuk catches this pass, it would be one of the top plays in 49ers history. Heck, it still might be, even though he couldn't keep a hold on it. I am, of course, talking about the wildcard game against the Seahawks in 2022. One thing you have to remember was that this was Purdy's first playoff game against a divisional rival, and it was only his 6th game as an NFL starter. I've watched this play probably more than any other. Part of it is watching how Purdy evaded everyone. Part of it is watching him actually throw the ball as he's about to be hit. Part of it is watching the zip and the angle that he had on that football. And part of it is watching the reactions of the other player as it's thrown and then dropped. That's not even mentioning the crowd getting more and more excited as the play went on. It's really one of the best plays I've ever seen. I think something else I deeply respect about that play is the fact that Brock Purdy pulled out everything he could, even though the 49ers had that game put away. Some people have said that it was unnecessary because he was putting himself in harm's way to get that touchdown, but I look at it this way. He wanted to make sure there was no doubt who was winning that game, and he wanted to make sure everyone knew what kind of quarterback he was going to be. How do I know that? Because during this last offseason, he mentioned that he wanted to have that mentality of making sure the other team was put away and had no chance of coming back. This play showed that he's actually had that mentality ever since he was a rookie. And there you have it, my personal list of the top 15 plays and some honorable mentions of the past 3 seasons. Truthfully, there are so many other plays that weren't mentioned, but if I had included them all, this video would have been 3 hours long. So I want to know what your favorite plays are. Sound off in the comments below. Let me know what you would have had in your top 10 or top 20 or even more. I want to hear from you. Now, before I sign off, I just wanted to give an update about this series as a whole. I've thought about it, and I realized that irrelevant for me is easier to make once the actual season is over. So, while we watch Brock Purdy and the rest of the team make a run for the Super Bowl, irrelevant will be on a hiatus, but it will return. That doesn't mean that I still won't be uploading content, it just means that it won't be this series, at least not until this upcoming season is over. I'll still be making 49er related content, among other content that I've been looking forward to making that won't be 49er related, but it will still be football related. In fact, one of the other videos I plan on making after this is my own personal top 15 quarterback rankings. I know I've already made one, but that was based on stats. Now, I get to be biased. Until then, I want to personally thank each and every one of you that have tuned in week after week. It's made this all worthwhile. It's been so fun getting to make this series as I've learned more and more about video editing. Until then, thanks for liking, commenting, and watching. It means the world. Catch you soon.